Finally got around to making another video. I know it's been a while. And today's video is actually not about a specific knife, really, but I wanted to talk about steel as it relates to industry promotion versus actual cutting performance of individual steels. This is a very large, or at least what to me is a very large pile of cardboard. Somewhere around 1,200 cuts of cardboard. I was lucky enough to get 10 or 12 boxes of the same cardboard. And this is the fourth run through with this knife, which is the Mainstays, which is kind of like Walmart's own knife brand. Extremely inexpensive. This is the Mainstays utility knife is what they call it. This knife was literally $1, not on sale. That's the normal price. Extremely inexpensive, cheap knife. Very, I guess you could barely call that a hollow grind, what they had on it. This is my edge. I basically had to completely cut an entire new edge bevel. The main edge bevel, if you could even call it that, was extremely obtuse and literally not sharp in any way, shape, or form by any standards. And I wanted to use this knife. This is the fourth time I've done this. I wanted to use this knife because these types of knives, specifically with this type of steel, which while it's technically a mystery steel, I would argue this is something around the same sort of class as the 3CR13 MOV, which is about in the same group as 420J2. Sort of mid-carbon, extremely low carbide steel. And I use this because we are often told in the knife industry that, especially by people who sell rather expensive knives, that the reason we should buy their knives and not these is because the performance of these knives, like this, are just atrocious, and every time you try to cut something with it, a baby dies, and polar bears lose more of the ice caps. These knives are just terrible, and they should never be touched. And you should always only use super duper uber fancy steels with a lot of numbers and a lot of V's somewhere in their name. So for a while I kind of fed into that whole mentality. You know, there was a long time where basically M4 was like the lowest carbide stuff I would use, even though I still really enjoy and love M4. But once I really started getting into the use of knives and actually cutting things, you kind of start to realize a lot of the nonsense, hype, and frankly bullshit that gets peddled in the knife industry, especially as it relates to blade steels. This amount of cardboard, obviously this has no practical use, but these types of tests are done very often to show the relative superiority of steels like 10V over steels like this. And while I'm certainly not going to make the claim that you should pick this steel over 10V for this type of cutting, 10V, S90V, I would certainly agree that they have shown to be superior in an absolute sense for this sort of cutting. This steel still, even after this amount of cutting, was able to be walked through phone book paper. This is an extra coarse DMT edge, about 8 degrees per side, with a micro bevel from that same stone. And yeah, even after all this cutting, this steel, which has a far from perfect or optimal, I guess would be a better word, heat treatment. I mean, hell, I even got some corrosion from this steel, which you can kind of see this little line right about here, if it'll focus. That right there is actual rust. That was on the blade because it got wet in the blade holder that it comes with, and I just left it there because it's kind of, hey, how's the corrosion? So even though this is typically designed to be a very high stainless steel, this thing still rusts, and that's a very good sign. Well, that's a very telling sign of a suboptimal heat treatment. But even with that, this knife, which we are told should never be able to hold an edge or take an edge, can, one, take an edge very easily and take quite a fine edge easily. But even after all this cutting of all this cardboard and super abrasive material, was still able to walk through phone book paper. I'm not claiming it's push cutting it anymore. It's not, you know, zipping through real easy. You have to sit there and kind of baby it through and nurse it. But that still is counter to what the vast majority of people in the industry would tell us, especially knife companies selling knives in your fancy schmancy steels like S110V, 10V, 90V, LMAX, Van Axe 75, and CalMax, and etc. All the V's and Maxes, and it's all those good things. And this isn't an indictment of those steels, but what it is, it's really a discussion about, how much salesmanship there really is. Because while, yeah, I'm still going to take my Spyderco K2 in 10V or my Spyderco South Fork in S90V over this knife for this type of cutting, looking at this from a practical standpoint, how many people are really going to be doing this amount of cutting in one sitting and cutting up boxes in this way? And this knife was still, after all of this cutting, this astronomical, impractical amount of cutting, can still walk through phone book paper. And if you wanted to bring it back to that super high sharpness, this steel is just stupidly easy to grind. Literally not even 10 passes per side on this thing on my extra coarse DMT, and I'm back to where I started. So it really makes you think when you get out and use these types of knives. When you put aside all of the preconceived notions, all of the marketing, all of the steel chart fact sheets that the foundries put out, all that stuff, and you take an honest look at the steels and the performance of these steels, when you just understand a little bit how to manipulate them to bring out the performance you want, it really, really opens your eyes to how much nonsense there really is. Again, I want to really stress, I'm not saying you should drop all of your $100+ knives and only buy these cheap $1 knives from Walmart. But next time someone tries to tell you that, oh, you have the only steels that are worth anything are, M4 and ZDP 189 and YXR7 or Calorie X or any of that stuff, good steels, just realize that they're probably blowing smoke up your ass. Because, as I've shown here, even this $1 knife, from a practical standpoint, with a little bit of knowledge and understanding of steels and knives, blows the shell out of all of these ridiculous arguments about how bad these classes of steels are. And remember, this is with a suboptimal heat treatment. Imagine if you let somebody like, say, a Jerry Fisk, who uses steels of this nature on a regular basis, an ABS Master Bladesmith. Imagine what he could do with this type of steel. Imagine what he already does with stuff like 440A, which already gets a bad reputation. So yeah, this is, and like I think I said before, this is like the 4th time I've done this, and the more and more I use this knife, and I have another one, it's a bigger version than this, that I put a polished edge on that I'm going to do some woodworking with, some more woodworking. I've done a little bit already. It really opens your eyes to how much stuff in the industry is really not based on any objective measure of fact, and it's just basically there to sell you stuff. But yeah, this is just a small discussion. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on steels and stuff. If there's anything I said you guys would disagree with, or have a different perspective on, I'd love to hear it. So thanks guys, have a good day.